Well, hi everybody. I thought I'd talk today a little about my days at the coast. These are true tales of my African adventures. May this inspire you, deter you, caution you, and above all, entertain you. We have a glorious coastline in South Africa running from the tip right at the end of Cape Town all the way up to Natal, Zululand, and just above Zululand is Mozambique. There's a border there. So we have tropical forest and sea, and we go down all the way down to Mediterranean. And it's a glorious coastline. And there are fabulous estuaries along the coastline, and the sea life is fantastic. Now, I got hooked up a bit with fishing. Excuse the pun. And I used to frequent a few areas where I fished in my younger days. One of the most glorious places we fished in was the Quicksand river mouth, where it entered the Indian Ocean. And there was an abundance of fish there, lots of big sharks, especially ragged-tooth sharks. And of course there were what we called salmon or carp, a huge fish growing to an enormous size of nearly 2 meters, and a large variety of fish. The estuary was fantastic. When the tide was in, the estuary was quite deep, very deep in certain areas, and all manner of fish would come into the estuary. And when it was low tide, there were sandbars, sandbanks, pools, and shallower areas that you could walk through. So on a good day, when it was sunny, low tide, we would stroll through the shallow waters in the estuary looking for certain bait items, and it was just really nice to walk through there. But there were pitfalls, let me tell you. And one of the pitfalls was electric rays. Now, some of you may have had experience with electric rays, and some of you may not ever have had an experience with one. But electric rays come into the estuary, and then they go onto the sandbars in the shallow water, and they bury themselves in the sand where it's nice and warm, and the water is probably a foot deep. It can vary in depth at low tide, and there they lie, and you can't see them because they're buried, of course. If you stand on one, you get up to 220 volts, and that makes you jump quite a considerable distance into the air, or sideways. Either way, you usually fall over, and you get one heck of a shock, and it's memorable, let me tell you. So on this particular day, I went out. I was going along towards an exposed sandbar, and I stood right on top of one, and I went off sideways and collapsed in the water. Of course, you get up, it doesn't do much harm. Now, I can tell you it knocks you for a 6, and you go upwards or sideways. Well, I went sideways and I went down into the water. It is such a rude shock, I cannot tell you. And of course, the thing then gets out of the sand and moves off to a new distance, a new destination, and buries itself there for someone else to stand on, of course. And so I thought, you know, it's a good day for electric rays, and I'm not going to do too much walking around because once is enough. So I decided to rather go back to the shore and go somewhere else to look for my bait. On the way back, I stood on another one. Also went off sideways into the water. 2 shocks for the day, too much for me. I got out of the water. There's another peril, and this is somewhat more ominous. I went close to the mouth where the water is very deep. The estuary waters come in from the sea and fill through the mouth, and it creates this very deep channel many, many meters deep. So you can't walk off the bank at that point. But occasionally, after some heavy seas, you notice that there is a secondary bank just underwater before the drop-off. So I thought I'd go and stand on that bank with my Polaroid glasses and see if there were bait fish moving past. As I got onto the secondary bank, I sunk into it up to my knees. It's a type of a quicksand. It's a phenomenon which occurs there occasionally, very occasionally, in certain places. And it is such fine sand. I don't know how this phenomenon occurs like this, but it seems to deposit very, very fine sand which is full of liquid. In other words, it's not settled and dry. And I sank up to my knees, and as I moved, started sinking a bit further, and I thought I'd better just stop. Now, I was trying not to panic. It's very easy to panic in these situations because the tide was at its lowest. That means it starts to come in, and it can come in very quickly. And if you're stuck and you can't get out, you're done. And if you sink deeper, you may in fact get to a point where you go below the water level. And so I had to think what to do. So what I did was I allowed myself to fall backwards and sideways. In this way I could reach backwards to the solid river sand, beach sand, which was just behind me, and I managed to dig my hands in quite deep and pull very slowly and gently, and I managed to get my legs free bit by bit until eventually I was able to drag myself out onto the solid sand, all the time trying not to panic. Got out onto the solid sand, looked back and thought, that was really very dangerous. Do be careful when walking into areas by yourself where you have this phenomenon occurring. Although you can't see that the phenomenon has occurred, you can't see into the sand to know that it's like quicksand. So I forgot about that, and a few years later I was in another remote part of the estuary, and I was walking along, and the same sort of thing. There was a deep channel, and there was this subaquatic channel just below the water nearby to the solid sand, and I walked onto it. I had my throw net with me to catch small fish, and I walked onto this, and I sank immediately past my knees, and every slight movement saw me going a bit deeper, and I thought, I've got myself into trouble now. The water was coming in already, and it was coming in quite fast. And if I got stuck there, I would drown. And as it was, up to my knees, I could hardly move. The sand seems to cling to your limbs and hold you in position. It's a most treacherous type of phenomenon. So having my net with me, it was quite a large net, about a 6-foot diameter throw net. I thought I'd fold it up gently, lay it behind me on the so-called quicksand, and then allow myself to fall backwards onto the net. And this worked. I fell back onto it, and I didn't sink any further because the weight was now off my legs, but I was quite deep already. So I then managed to twist myself around, dig my hands into some solid sand further back, and once again slowly but surely pull myself out of the quicksand, all the while the water was coming in very quickly, and it had risen a few centimeters up my legs already. And so had I not gotten myself out timeously, I would have been covered in water, with water. A very, very, very difficult situation to find yourself in. I went to some of the locals after that day and asked them about this phenomena, and they said, oh yeah, no, this happens from time to time. Be very careful, they said, because if you get stuck in there and the tide's coming in, you can drown. So thanks very much for telling me now. I avoided all of those situations from then onwards, particularly when I was by myself. And I was rather amused. Could have been a year later or more. I was walking in the estuary because I'd seen this commotion, and a 4x4 the driver had gone over solid sand and then into the shallow water and went onto the quicksand, and half of his vehicle disappeared in the quicksand. And they had to get an enormous tractor to come into the shallow waters, fix a chain to the vehicle to be able to pull it out. And that was the nature of that quicksand. Very dangerous. Hey, by the way, I do have Patreon, so you can join me there too.